Hello and welcome everyone to a national strategy session with Rank the Vote. I'm Celia Nolan, training director, and so happy this evening to be sitting down with Dr. Landon Mascareñaz to talk about EduDemocracy. And yes, I said EduDemocracy. This may be a new term to some of us, but we'll know a lot more about it by the end of this meeting. Landon is co-founder and leader of the Cornerstone Project, which is a national network organization. Rank the Vote is also a national organization. So we would love to know what state you are from. If you could put that in the chat, it would be neat to see where everyone is calling in here from tonight as you are all pouring in. So it's great we have so much interest in this topic. Would also love to know what about this topic does interest you? What brought you to this meeting? Is there anything you're hoping to learn from it? You can put that in the chat. And as we're talking to during this meeting, we are not just talking at you. We would love for you to be interacting too. So feel free to put any questions in the chat as you think of them too. We'll have a chance to, just have a discussion with Landon later on. So this is great as I'm seeing where everyone is coming in from. If you just joined us, this is a national strategy session with Rank the Vote and Dr. Landon Mascareñaz of the Cornerstone Project. And feel free to light up that chat more with the state you are from and what particularly interests you about this meeting. So I did say that we're going to be talking about EduDemocracy this evening. You may guess that's the intersection of education and democracy. No big topics are islands, right? There are no silos, lots of connections, lots of interactions, lots of opportunities. So we'll be hearing about that tonight. And someone else who's very involved in the Cornerstone Project is the executive director of Rank the Vote, who is with us tonight. So thank you for joining us, Nathan.
Hey, Celia. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me on. I'll be really brief so we can get over to Landon. I just wanted to just set the stage a little bit here. I met Landon. I was introduced to him by a mutual friend late last year, and was really excited to learn about what he and his colleagues were thinking about for launching the Cornerstone Project. Uh, you know, is somebody myself as somebody who spends a lot of time with Democracy Forum. I think like all of you, like we're doing it because there's a benefit down the road for making something that involves representation or government work better for all of us. And so I was really intrigued to learn what Landon and his colleagues were sharing about their experience working to improve the educational space and some of the key barriers that they would run into as people working to make education work better. And it was interesting to find that that in many cases it was problems very similar to what we've explored in other areas of government, whether you think about Congress or your state legislature or whatnot. And so, long story short, the other thing that really impressed me is, I mean, I've known for a while that there's a lot of folks of all different political stripes and ideas and backgrounds working to improve education for a lot of different reasons. And, a lot of them, most of them very good, noble reasons that are really important. I mean, when you think about how important education is. So in addition to this being a really important area of life in society, in addition to these people that are shakers and movers, they're finding that election reform is part of the answer to their thing. They also just happen to be a huge, very active and energetic constituency. So the idea of getting people who are more focused on election reform, working on improving education and vice versa, this could be just a really powerful opportunity for us. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Landon, and thank everybody for joining us today.
Thank you, Nathan. I really appreciate that. I just really want to kick it off with a lot of thank yous and gratitude to the Rank the Vote team. you and just start with you. I just want to say thank you for all of your welcomingness and openness to and encouragement as the Cornerstone Project was getting started. I'm just so grateful for you and your mentorship and your camaraderie in this work. You know, as I've ventured, which I'll share in a minute here, from education more and more into the democracy space, I'm very grateful for people like you along the way who have helped me understand the contours of the landscape and all the possibilities that it entails. And I'm very grateful to you. Also, a lot of gratitude to Celia and the Rank the Vote team for putting the webinar together. As you can see, they've done a lot of outreach, and we have a lot of folks here from all over the country, and it's a testament to the organization that you all have put together. And, you know, we do a lot of work in this country and around the world to build a better world, to have social impact for a better democracy. And I think it's always important to have gratitude for those who are making events like this come together. So thank you, Celia. Thank you for all that you did to put this event together. And you know, I see a few friendly faces in the space. I saw in the chat some folks from places that I know and love. I really just also have to say a special shout out to Linda Templin out there in Colorado. You know, Linda, as I was getting really started in the democracy stuff, she was very welcoming to me, and we got started working on pushing for municipal change for ranked choice voting in Denver. And if you ever had a chance to hang out with Linda, she might be one of the funniest people you've ever met. She's hilarious and she's whip smart, and we're very lucky to have her in Colorado leading the charge for ranked choice voting. So a little bit about me, a little bit about who we are, I think, together, and the moment in time that we have. And then I have a presentation we'll share to talk about education, democracy, EduDemocracy, and the Cornerstone Project work. And we'll let you play with our new tool that just was released literally yesterday to the world, which is we think potentially the first of its kind full education democracy policy landscape analysis around the country. So can't wait to share that with you all. We'll walk through what we're doing here at Cornerstone. So, you know, a lot of, for me, my journey really begins on the Navajo Nation in New Mexico, where I taught first grade. And I was really provoked by the fact that the families and communities that supported my students were across a dirt road, but yet 1,000 miles away from the way the school brought them into the community. And that structural space between the community and the school became the calling force for my career. And ever since then, I've been really preoccupied with how do we open up public systems to the communities they serve. And for the last 20 years, I've done that in education, looking at how to open up public systems, started something called the Open Systems Institute, which looks at how to do that, published a book on the topic, was appointed by our governor here in Colorado to serve on the community college board, now serve as chair of the community college board here in Colorado, and have worked on a variety of economic and democracy initiatives now. And really at this moment in our time, I find myself faced with a new choice of kind of bringing these two parts of my soul and spirit together around education and democracy. And that's really what I believe we have the moment to do right now in our time. And when I look around this space and I see all these incredible democracy advocates and renovators and reformers all over the country, whether you're in Florida, New Mexico. Again, my family's from New Mexico. I see some New Mexico energy in the chat. Yeah, it's hard to miss the New Mexico with that fireplace right behind you there. You know, it's where my family's from. And I think about all the work that you all are doing, that we all get to do together at this inflection moment in our nation's history, which we talk a lot about, where there's never been more democracy, renovation, ballot initiatives, municipal energy, all happening all over the country. And as someone who's spent my time and career in education, I really am asking myself, and I'm asking you all, what would it mean to take that spirit and energy that you all have really captivated and captured in the democracy space and extend it and bridge to the education field? And we think that's what the moment in time we're in right now. That's the now for Cornerstone. That's the now for us in the education democracy space. What would it mean to take this incredible energy and take it into a space that we know requires and needs it now more than ever? And so with that, let's jump in to talking and learning about the Cornerstone Project, what we're seeking to do, and what this tool has the opportunity to get us started thinking about. Can everyone see my screen? Wonderful. Okay. So what we're going to spend some time doing here is really first off having a conversation about what Cornerstone Project is, what the EduDemocracy research looks like, and then we're going to open up for discussion and have a conversation about where we go next. So let's be honest. Public education in America is at a dangerous democratic moment. You would have been living under a rock if you've missed stories for the last few years about the challenging nature of school board elections, extremist takeover in many places, and struggles of folks who are trying to build a better education system, scaling that success, sometimes blocked by the very boards and government systems which are actually supposed to support them in improving the education and well-being of lots of schools and families in the communities they serve. And the question we have to ask ourselves, from my background as an educator or even as a citizen is, how can education remain the cornerstone of our democracy if we actually don't take seriously the elections, governance, and legal structures that bind it together, which are bureaucratic at worst and authoritarian at best? We could even use the word illiberal. If we went to a democracy expert and said, here's how we conduct school board elections in the United States, they'd laugh us out of the room. But yet we constantly come back to this struggle we have with knowing that our school boards are creating significant challenges and barriers, even for the school board members themselves or the superintendents that they work with. And I've worked with many of them over the course of my career. We can do better in opening up our democracy in education to all those that it serves. And so what would it mean to activate the education and democracy community across this country to do both together, to really have that energy at that same place? I'm a big fan of Dr. Danielle Allen's work. I love her column on democracy renovation. And I often tell people that if we're renovating our democracy house, then education's the front door. It's right there for most voters, for most citizens, voting for school board, voting for higher education races. It's often the most proximate democratic institution that people face. So if we don't take reform in our democracy structures in education seriously, then we're missing a major opportunity. So what Cornerstone is a national effort to redesign democracy in education in two areas. One, the electoral side, looking at school board races, edu races, state board races, and then governance design, which we'll talk about here in a minute. And we really think this is a critical opportunity for us to look at it all collectively. And as someone who spent a lot of his career in education working on a variety of systems change endeavors, if we looked at all that philanthropy has spent, all the time hours people have spent over the past 2 decades of massive structural opportunities and changes in education, after school programs, teacher pay pilots, new ways of thinking about autonomous school models, what percentage would we allocate to thinking and innovating in the democracy infrastructure surrounding education? Probably very little, probably less than 10%. So we believe this is a moment in time to focus the philanthropic policy and political leaders of our country to make this change possible. So the co-leads in the project are 3 great organizations, which I've worked with for a long time. And we came together and said, based on our variety of backgrounds, let's start moving into this space to think about what it could look like. Education Civil Rights Now, led by Ben Austin, who is thinking about and many of you may know this, but the simple reality is there's no federal right to education in this country. Our students don't have a legal right to education. In many states around the country, there is no quality guarantee for education to participate in a democracy, which means that many of our students and learners lack the legal protections for them to fully participate in the education system or challenge it on structural grounds. The Open Systems Institute, my colleague and great friend Donnie Tran and I founded a few years ago to help leaders actually learn how to do co-creation work with their broader communities so that we can ignite that spark of education in the education structure, a spark of democracy in education. And Seek Common Ground, led by Sandy Boyd, which brings organizations, coalitions, community members together across all different types of topics to find a new way forward in our society. We're also really grateful to have an incredible exploratory committee that's been with us on this way. Nathan Lockwood being one of the co-chairs, along with Kira Orange-Jones, who was the former vice president of the Louisiana Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, and a variety of leaders in the education and democracy field. We're very grateful to our exploratory committee because their feedback has been essential to help us really model the change we seek. If we're really trying to bring the democracy and education fields together, then our exploratory committee has to be representative of both. So simply put, our theory of change, if we leverage education races and education governance as places for democracy renovation to scale, we believe that we can inspire a new generation of political leaders Often in education, we lament the fact that our school board races are the starting point for people in their political careers. In Cornerstone, we want to flip that. We want to say it's great that people start their political careers potentially in education, or maybe they don't, but it's a really critical space. But if we do democracy renovation right in education, think of the spillover effects at state legislative levels, at city council levels, at the federal level. We also want to inspire a generation of youth leaders to see democracy practiced more effectively by them participating on school boards or seeing ranked choice voting take place in their local school board elections. And then we believe that if we can do this, that it'll actually accelerate democracy redesign momentum, not only in the education space, but into other civic leaders. The education space is one of the largest civic structures, ecosystems in our country. And if democracy renovation and democracy work can occur within that space, then those leaders can work together across diverse backgrounds to spread the democracy movement across not only the education sector, but our society overall. So think of the potential impact. This is a really great article. If you want to use it, you can use your phone to scan the QR code and pull it up. But it's a great summary of the current status of our just school board races. This is even including thousands of higher ed races in this country. There's 82,000 school board members across this country. There's 13,000 school districts. There's a low turnout almost across the board, between 5 to 10% on average. This is because in many places, our school board races are put off cycle. In some ways, you could even call them off cycle. They're not even sometimes aligned with local municipal elections. We know that they vast majority identify as white and as male, when in fact that is not necessarily aligned to many of the communities they represent. And we know that there's this well-researched demographic deficit in our school board structures, which means that oftentimes they are not attached or representative of the median voter in their particular community. And there's a whole set of research that says that if school boards are led by people that look like and represent the ideas of their community, then the students benefit from additional learning benefits from that as well, which tells us that democracy reform, which we know, as you all know, creates a lot of opportunity for women and people of color and people of all different backgrounds and ideas to be able to win and govern. That means that there could be some enormous spillover effects in the way that our schools are run and managed. So what are the potential innovations we've been talking about? Thanks to folks like Linda, Nathan, and other folks on this call helping me think about it and learn about this over the course of the last couple of years. We've taken a list of potential innovations like ranked choice voting, moving school board elections to even year, public financing in school boards, expanding the vote by mail, education as a civil right, students on boards, and proportional representation and multi-member representation. And one of the first things we did is we went to the democracy groups and we went to the education groups and we said, hey, has anyone ever done a landscape analysis over where these issues sit relative to edu races and edu governance? And the thing that we were told pretty much universally was that no one has done that analysis. And so back this spring, we said, well, we probably have to take that on, because it's probably going to be impossible for us to bring these sectors together, for us to do learning and commit to action if we don't do that. Which means then we brought a research dynamic duo together that just dug into the research over the course of the past 12 weeks. And from that, they produced something that we're calling the National EduDemocracy Landscape Map. Sorry, I got my little words flowing together here. The EduDemocracy Landscape Map, which we'll get to in a second. But what are our strategies to do that? And I just want to briefly go into this before we start playing around with the map. We really think our strategies bridge to learn and to act. And it's pretty critical. We really want to see the education and the democracy field starting to work together and talk together. Folks like Forward, who are thinking about ways of depolarizing at the school board level, or the Partnership for the Future Learning, which includes over 1,000 education organizations across this country. We want them to start working together with folks like Rank the Vote and NANNER, the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers, so that the education and democracy fields can start having more natural connections and working together around some of the very interesting topics and intersections that they're both working on. But that's also going to mean that we have to have a learning agenda. We've started doing this spring where we could, and because we did a survey of a ton of education advocates back in December when we were getting started. This is actually probably one of the first conversations I had with Nathan, is I said, look, our education field is enormously, existentially worried about the status of democracy, which we know our broader body politic is as well. But they actually have almost no knowledge of things like even year voting, ranked choice voting, mail-in balloting, the things that you as democracy renovators know and love and care about and are really interested in. Our education field, it just hasn't had this been a part of their agenda. So we have to have a learning agenda. So we've been doing webinars about some of these topics, and that map right there, that's essentially us doing this national landscape analysis. But we have to move to acting, because if we're just bridging, we're talking. If we're just learning, we're thinking. But if we act, then we actually have the opportunity to move our country forward and move us forward to a brighter, more open, democratic future. So the moment you've all been waiting for, the National EduDemocracy map. So I'm dropping the link in the chat. I know people are going to want to start playing with it, but we've done a landscape analysis of EduDemocracy in 50 states plus DC. And on the map, you can start to play with it, explore, and think through some of these pieces. And we've also ranked each of the states across, do they have enabling legislation in places like Minnesota and Maine? Yes, that makes it possible for EduDemocracy to flourish more effectively. Are they partially developed? Do they have a couple of bright spots moving here and there? Or do they have little to no existing legislation? Or even in some places, bans, as we know is happening in a lot of communities. So for example, Alaska, and we're really proud of what we call the EduDemocracy flower, where essentially we're seeing all the potential innovations kind of placed together, and looking at, okay, in Alaska, they have nonpartisan elections, they have some campaign funding transparency, and there's both proposed and possible policy for ranked choice voting in school boards, but they have no policy proposals across a variety of other perspectives, whether it's on-cycle elections, a right to a high-quality education, students on school boards, aspects we know could greatly accelerate participation and reduce polarization in our education space. So this is Alaska. California, look at the contrast. California has passed a significant amount of laws that create the opportunity for on-cycle elections, which means, and the research is very clear on this, on-cycle elections create board members who are more likely to represent the median voter in their community. And that goes a long way to fighting extremism and polarization in our nation's schools. There are municipalities in California working on ranked choice voting in their school board elections. They've done some great work to expand voter rights. They're holding on to nonpartisan elections. And while it's not highlighted here, there is a coalition in California that was likely to move on a right to a high quality education in the next couple of years. Idaho, we have a ban on ranked choice voting that applies even to school boards in Idaho. But we see some examples of students being on school boards. Again, an opportunity to see the distinctiveness and unevenness of many of these EduDemocracy reforms and innovations across the country. Colorado, Centennial State, go Colorado, Viva Colorado. We have a lot of opportunity in Colorado, but still a lot of room to grow. Some folks have, thanks to folks like Linda, have pushed some pretty important policies. We know folks proposed a policy to see ranked choice voting in school board elections. It did not pass. We have some public financing opportunities for local school boards, and some expanded voting rights opportunities. And then in Louisiana, very limited, no policy proposals, but a ban on ranked choice voting, but some campaign funding transparency. So you have the link. I'm assuming everyone is now playing with it, going to their state where they live, places they're interested, and looking all over. A big caveat I want to say is that, we've spent a lot of time shopping this research around to lots of folks in the education democracy space. And we have a caveat on every single one of these pages is just if you're seeing something on there that you think is not right, or you would dispute, or you think maybe should be framed a little differently, just shoot us an email. We have an email on there on every single state page. One of the main reasons we decided to create it as a website and not as a PDF is we didn't want it to become digital dust. And we want it to be an adaptive, ongoing piece of research and analysis that's a tool for advocates like you to start having conversations about these races in your community. Last but not least, Maine. Tons of proof points, tons of enabling legislation. We all know this from work in democracy in Maine, but I'll just tell you, as an education person, I did not know that Portland, Maine allows ranked choice voting in school board elections. And so when we think about innovations happening on the ground, this is an area where the education community needs to learn from the democracy space and begin that bridging and action in coordination together. What are we trying to do next if we're going to act? We need to see community level change, and we need to see state level change. We know that they're not mutually exclusive. We know that sometimes communities lead states and sometimes states lead communities, and that relationship back and forth varies from place to place and the political factors in every single one of these locations. But our work over the next 6 months will be to really start to think about where are places where the policy readiness is high, where there's a clear path. You can see that in the website. We have a table below every single one of the flowers that showcases, where would we actually change? Where would we put the initiative here? In this place, it's the legislature. In this place, it's a municipal vote. And where do we see probability of success? But we also are interested in places with really strong relationships and collaborative mindsets and where partners are interested. So we're out there right now banging the drum to raise the profile of EduRaces and bringing together the education democracy space. But over the next period of time here, we're going to be really thinking about the communities that have the opportunity to bridge and connect like this, selecting communities that we want to launch in 2025 and really building the capacity of sites to take on what comes next. So with that, I want to actually stop sharing and move us into the discussion and conversation phase of the night.
Going to be delivered and then the door open.
Great. Thank you so much, Landon. And I have to say, throughout your presentation, I was struck by how similar what you're talking about is what we talk about every day in the RCV space, even though, typically we're focusing on just that tool, but, it has so many ramifications. But, the gap that you were talking about between, the people who attend the school and having the influence over the school, the gap between voters and representatives, the funding investment may be large in a place where maybe we would like it to be moved over into another space, right? So really fascinating to hear that, we talk a lot about the races for legislators, but obviously these EduRaces are critical too. So one thing I was wondering about is that, RCV is one of those really rare issues that has cross-partisan support. There are many issues that don't qualify for that, right? Like there are moderate Republican senators, the House Progressive Caucus supports it, voters across the board. Have you approached legislators about this? What are you seeing in that space? Is this having, support on the various sides?
It's a awesome question. A few different things. One of the things that I always, one of the things that always made education work interesting and complicated was the interest convergence between Democrats, Republicans, and independents on issues. And that's a really complicated issue, right? There are probably a lot of people on this call with lots of different perspectives about various education issues. But I always believe in my heart that that's actually a pretty electric thing when you see folks across all backgrounds coming together to discuss the future of our education system. And I think that's a really fascinating aspect to democracy reform or renovation right now. I'm working on our statewide campaign on the rural outreach side for our open primaries, ranked choice measure, which I'm very excited about. And I see Republicans and Democrats, independents working together on this. So I think our ultimate hope is that the benefits of democracy reform will be seen by all parties. And as we begin to build coalitions in states, which, we don't see Cornerstone as the ones leading the charge in those places, but actually supporting local communities, we know that each of them are going to have a different set of issues. I saw someone talking about Kansas, New Mexico. Each of these places has a unique constellation on that flower, and we don't think our job is to show up and tell people what they should do, but rather open up a discussion and dialogue based on their unique political context of what's possible.
Another common goal we have, as you were talking about, is having, new and more different candidates step up into races, right? Um, and there are organizations that train people to run for office, right? So what do you think is the missing piece that the Cornerstone Project adds?
Well, I'll tell you something. I spent a lot of my career working in the rural Mountain West, working with superintendents and school boards, New Mexico, Colorado. And I'll tell you that it's really hard to get people to run for school board. It's really challenging. People are really worried about the kind of nasty politics, running in their own community. But this is why I think democracy renovation is so critical. It's really challenging in a lot of our rural school communities to run because they're decided by a dozen votes, sometimes 100 votes. If it's a big race, and that's a part of the challenge of having them on off cycle or odd years. That's a real big deal. If we thought differently about the amount of voters participating, if we moved school board elections to even years, and we did ranked choice voting, and we had some sort of public financing or support for candidates to come in, we'd probably see a whole new wave of people seeing this as an opportunity for them to get involved in their civic life. I mean, like you said, Celia, there's a whole ecosystem of people supporting folks to run right now, and over again, I hear people say it's the nastiness, it's the bitterness of our school board elections which keep me away. Well, let's actually unrig that part of the process, and let's create the opportunity for a more healthy, vibrant civic life in these education races by transforming the democracy infrastructure that surrounds them.
Mm-hmm. And, this takes me actually to a question that we got from the chat as you were talking about those different petals, right? The other pieces of this in your map, um, talking about that flower with all those different planks in it.
Right.
So Bob Pearls in New Mexico is talking about, how does this work in coalition? So he says, here at New Mexico Open Elections, we're transpartisan, with a clear understanding that we never discuss other policy issues, so we can hold our diverse coalition together focused on election reform. So what's your philosophy on this? Having these multiple planks rather than one core piece.
Yeah, I think that totally agree with Bob on that. Couldn't be more important. Again, interest convergence is the magic that makes the movement possible. And when you're able to hold for that, that's pretty incredible. And I think that's a power in the democracy movement. And I think it's got to be a power of our work in Cornerstone. It's one of the reasons that we've designed it to really actually help us stay low on the ladder of inference at the very beginning, to look at the flower and say, okay, what are we seeing state by state? We didn't have this data even, a couple months ago. Just because Bob's in New Mexico, I can't wait to, get a follow-up email from him. I'm hoping many of you will email me. Can't wait. I'm in New Mexico often, Bob. I have an office in Trinidad, Colorado, if you ever want to just drive halfway. I'm always down to talk about New Mexico, Colorado, and this work. So couldn't agree more. This is critical for us to do that because we actually need to be able to move on many of these issues.
And Aberman in DC is asking, in the area of ed governance specifically, can you give more examples of reforms? And what do you think about, for example, teacher cooperatives?
I think teacher cooperatives are really interesting. I think that, we've heard that a lot of folks are interested. There's a movement afoot in education to get students on school boards. If we think about representative participatory democracy, it's a reality, in fact, that if students have no legal right to a quality education and they're not represented on the boards that govern them, there's some pretty, you could make an argument for some pretty anti-democratic infrastructure surrounding the learning of students. Now, you could also say that our teachers are one of the most critical stakeholders running our education systems. So shouldn't they also have a voice in? And I think that like a part of this discussion is, again, we don't want this to become digital dust. We know the flower will grow. We might even have more petals. We might even think differently about the way the petals are organized. And but how important, good point, Elizabeth. I see you in the chat. And it's a really interesting thing to think about, actually, in the context of what comes next and how we keep exploring together.
So here's a big possible exploration from Linda in Colorado, as we know. What are your thoughts about direct democracy?
So really, that's, I'm always like, and by that, I'm assuming she means ballot initiative measures, direct democracy in a variety of ways. There's actually been some interesting conversations over the decades about direct democracy in our school systems. We found some articles here and there talking about it. I think it's worth really taking on and considering. If we think it works at the statewide level, I mean, it's pretty much the major tool a lot of democracy reform is using to build transpartisan coalitions around the country. Like, what would it mean to think about passing policy at a direct democracy level? We do it with bonds and mills when school districts go for money and cash and infrastructure build out. What would it mean to think differently about direct democracy in our education space? I think this kind of goes back to the overall point. What we don't want to do is say everyone needs 10 doses of this and 5 doses of this and 3 doses of this. It goes back to that initial analysis. How much time have we been spending innovating in democracy in education? And the answer is not enough. And so we have to have the humility and perspective to realize that it's an exploration. And that's a part of what we need to see on the map. And that's a part of coalitions leading this work, is to ask questions like Linda's question. Hey, what would it mean to take on direct democracy in education? What would it mean for students to be a part of that process, to be able to vote in school board elections? And maybe students could put initiatives and measures in front of their school board. Fun stuff to think about and worthy of our philanthropic, political, and policy energy and creativity.
So many complex, interesting, thorny questions around education and the structure of it, of course. We have a few questions about those. And so I'm wondering, does the Cornerstone Project wade into these specific types of questions, or, how do you interact with them? For example, charter schools, school choice, the number of school districts, different state systems. Is that something that Cornerstone addresses directly, or how do you approach those questions?
One of the things that I think we've done intentionally, if you take a look at our list of exploratory committee members, is we've tried to really bridge ideological differences in education too. So, we have some folks on our exploratory committee who are really pro charter school. We have some folks who are very skeptical of charters. We really are trying to keep it focused on the policy innovation space in education democracy. And that means that we got to bring people together from all different backgrounds to have that conversation. So I don't see us maybe saying like, having a position on charter schools. I think our position will be, how do we keep stimulating and connecting education advocates and democracy advocates in communities, in Minneapolis, in Omaha, in Texas, to have conversations between each other about ways to accelerate the openness of our democracy and education.
And moving from that bridging to learning to acting, right? So what are
Acting.
your next steps? And how can we as ranked choice voting advocates plug in and support you?
Well, the first and most elegant step is for you to be here in this room right now, playing with this tool, exploring the possibilities, sending us ideas and feedback that based on your perspective. That's the only way that the opportunity for us to bring these sectors together gets stronger. Please share it with folks in your community. The opportunity to connect and bridge and then act begins with you taking an interest in the perspectives facing our nation's schools and democracy together. And for us not to see them as siloed entities, but rather a part of this tapestry. And I think that's this conversation, that's this moment. And I think then what happens next is we want you to stay in touch. We want you to stay engaged with Rank the Vote on the important measures and work that they're conducting and organizing people with all over the country. And, we want you to stay connected to Cornerstone as we embark on what comes next, which will be to find communities and states that are excited about taking this on and doing our best to not only raise funds, but augment their capacity so that they can take on these issues in the ways that make sense for them. And so be prepared to stay in touch, to hear from us more. And that's where it goes. And I think more than that, it's getting too much ahead of it. I'm a big sci-fi comic book fan, and one of my favorite shows is The Flash. And there's a line from The Flash where, step 1 is make the plan, step 2 is do the plan, step 3 is realize the plan didn't quite line up, so you got to throw out the plan and build a new one. And what we're committed to in Cornerstone is laying out a chart and path, bringing people together in coalition, having the conversation, but never being afraid to say, let's explore new ways of working together.
Well, we love calls to action here, so keep them coming. We build that muscle all the time. And there's a question about, actions from Elaine in Kansas regarding talking to legislators about this issue. So the question is, if we can't even get our legislators to fund schools, what suggestions do you have for getting them to think about EduDemocracy?
Man, such a great question, Elaine. And I know that a lot of educators that I'm friends with and colleagues with in Kansas are they're lamenting the state of what's going on there. And so my heart goes out to you all. I know it's a struggle. And I just want to name this as one of the reasons why I think our democracy movement and our education movement should be working closer together. Because I think that if we were to commit to understanding these intersections more fully, we would start to see them as, again, part of an interconnected space. In a world where if we continue to have our elections on off cycle in plurality races versus ranked choice methods, or not find ways to include students, in every single one of these places that we found, there are people across partisan lines who are willing to explore and innovate. So sometimes, again, it's about finding that first next step to work on with a group of people. We might know that our hope is to get to this other thing. We have this dream of Kansas being a place where everyone can be funded to have the education that they know is right for them. But maybe actually people are interested in students on school boards for a variety of different reasons. Maybe they are interested in holding elections on even years to be able to make that more possible in their context. And maybe, just maybe, and we've seen this actually in lots of places, that a lot of conservatives and independents and Democrats can agree that students deserve the right to a quality education, a legal right. And if you can open up that venue, it's not inherently about funding, but it does open up conversations. And so, I think sometimes, when I think about, energy, I think about jujitsu, and I think about martial arts. Sometimes we do this a lot. Boom, boom, boom. We kind of keep hitting the same thing over and over again, versus using the energy around us to go to different places and opportunities that may allow us to start having different types of conversations that move our communities forward. When we know that, if we just have the same conversation over again, i.e. funding in Kansas or in Colorado, teacher pay, we're 50th or 49th in the country, it's disgraceful. How do we start to have other conversations to create momentum that may actually help us get to that more open future that isn't directly oppositional to some other folks in our space?
Another question about coalition from David in New York. Have you spoken with Generation Vote, Voters of Tomorrow, other youth democracy orgs? It feels like there's the possibility of a broad national coalition here if it doesn't exist already. Possible call to action there.
The great call to action, the answer is yes and maybe and no. We've reached out to tons of groups. We've had initial conversations with many of them. We've used a lot of their resources and given them a heads up. But there is so much more to do. And we think this is a great opportunity to start having even more of those conversations.
Great. So if anyone knows anyone, has connections, let's all talk.
Yeah. Always take an intro.
Great. And Mike, I see you have your hand up. I know the chat is not easy for everyone. So if you do have a question, feel free to unmute and ask Landon directly.
Is okay to jump in?
Absolutely, go for it.
Landon, really appreciate your work and what you're doing. Just by quick introduction, my name is Mike Kennig. I happen to live in Georgia, very active with this is probably the first call I think I've ever seen Nanner get a shout out and show up on a graphic. So that was nice. I think most people on this call fully appreciate Nanner is really the coalition of organizations like Rank the Vote and Fair Vote and all the other great reform organizations, or what's the word you keep using, Danielle's word?
Renovators.
Renovate organization. But I spent 35 years in commercial construction and spent a lot of time in career and technical education. I was on the chair of the board of what in Georgia we call it a career academy, a career high school.
Right.
And so share the passion. I tell people all the time that, I've been to lobbying at the federal level, the state level, been involved in advocacy work. And one thing I loved about when I first got involved with election reform is it was just like career education and workforce development. Everybody supported it.
Right.
It truly crossed ideological lines and partisan. Now that's changed in on the election reform side in the last few years, but I think mostly just with the extremists, but that's another whole side conversation. So that's just a little context for you to know where I'm coming from. And I've already sent you connection, but I'd love to probably follow up with you and talk in greater detail. I'm very intrigued. There's a couple of thoughts that are kind of colliding in my head, and I apologize for the long explanation and question, but I really was surprised in a good way, but I think there's sort of a difference, at least in my mind, between how you address this in the academic side of things, in curriculum and working with schools and student governments and things like that, versus dealing with this. I'm not even sure what the right way to say it is, but I'll call it the administration or the governance of schools, which starts to get into the political side of things. Because we do elect our school boards. I think that's great too. And I'll just dumb this part down to my wife, who really tolerates all this stuff with me. She appreciates it and supports it, but she kind of fast forwards and dumps things down in a great way sometimes. And she just keeps saying to me over and over and over again that if we're going to get there on ranked choice voting, I know we track it. I know Fair Vote and others probably track it in how schools and students are using it at the college level. But she keeps saying to me over and over and over again, we got to get schools to use it in the high schools.
Yes.
So that these kids are getting exposed to it and not, cut them off at the knees. This whole, it's complicated, it's hard to understand, and blah blah blah. So that by the time they're voting age, they're already used to it. It's the way, So my sort of first simple question is, I brought that up. I've been on calls with the iCivics folks and numerous folks, and I've never really gotten a solid, good answer to anybody that's really made a program together to make that happen. So I'll pause there.
Well, just a couple quick things on that. I'm actually in my dad's office tonight because we have a big family event, so I'm stepping away for the call. But my dad's built some of the coolest buildings in Colorado. He's in construction management. I've done a lot of career workforce work in my career, and I love that work. It's just so powerful for students and families. And I'm literally looking around all the cool stuff my dad's built in his office right now. So anyway, I just appreciate your work on that, Michael. I think the answer is yes, yes, yes. We need it to be on. That's kind of like second plank of our theory of action, right? We need students to see democracy practice better in our schools so that they are inspired for the future of our country and for actually practicing it in their own voting process as well. So that comes, I do some work at the University of Denver. Their student government elections are in ranked choice now. There's so much work in this space, and maybe that's like you just might have cooked up a new idea for Nathan and you and I to have a conversation about down the line. Maybe there's like a, educator ranked choice toolkit we could start thinking about and getting out in the world.
I think this is turning into a working meeting, Landon. We've got all these ideas popping up, and Susan in Wisconsin has another one.
Okay, great.
Asking, would it help to talk with current local school board members about this paradigm to entertain for possible implementation? Are you ready for that? Are there steps that you would recommend that people take before contacting people directly? What's
You know
the
what?
path
I
there?
think the reason that we put these maps out into the world is we think it's time to start having the conversation. One of my favorite meetings I've done, actually, man, in the past year, is with a group of school board members from all over the country. And we talked about all this. And the reality is that, what's that metaphor of like you're a fish swimming in water? People have they've come to believe that the way that the structure surrounding their education governance and electoral systems are just the way it is. Because in our education community, we've again spent very little advocacy, very little policy ideation, very little creative energy thinking differently about how these things can be structured. And so I went through this with that community of incredible school board members from all over the country. And by the end, we were all pumped about the opportunity to like interrogate all these structures. And again, it's not saying we have to do all the flower tomorrow. We got to take all the petals, we got to do it tomorrow. No, it's about looking at your context, thinking about what's possible, starting to explore it. So that's what I would tell folks. Look at your context. Start having conversations. Back in the 90s, the Department of Justice ruled that at-large school boards were a 14th Amendment due process violation. But during the Bush administration, the DOJ stopped prosecuting those cases, which means that we have tons of at-large school districts in this country that are elected at the plurality level without ranked choice, without proportional representation, with on odd years, which means that they are likely, essentially a closed system for many of the communities they serve. And I've seen a list of the top 20 or 30 school districts in this country who use at-large, and I'll tell you, it's not going to shock anyone. It's some of the most politically dysfunctional school systems in our country. We're with incredible leaders inside of them and incredible people trying to do good work. But if the infrastructure is illiberal governing our education systems, then we are going to continually face this challenge over and over and over again. So we have to take it on and we have to start asking some big questions.
I love the excitement you had about all this, all the ideas that are coming up from these school boards meeting nationally. That's amazing. But here's an interesting devil's advocate question. So maybe if you could just bring it home for us, why is this so important? So why do we need school boards? It could be run by other organizations, right? Teachers'
Right.
organizations, parents, legislators, why school boards?
So it's a really interesting question because there's a lot of folks, especially in the education space, who have become so disenchanted with school boards that they are called to ask the question of why do we even have them? And you know what? I sympathize with that question because I understand the frustration with how they're currently structured. And I think my invitation to that idea is to say the thing that we should 100% not do is have school board structure the way that they currently are right now. And that's really important. And I think that it's been unfortunate in this country. School boards and municipal elections used to be timed on even years with every other election. But reformers back in the early part of the 20th century moved them off the on cycle into other times and periods because they have had a variety of critiques about the big city machines running schools and cities at that time, which meant then we've had kind of since for almost 100 years a significant amount of challenges around a smaller and smaller group of people managing our nation's schools. That's called elite capture, and there's a lot of really good articles written about that. And the reality is that the solution to elite capture isn't to actually find a new elite to manage it. It is actually to open it up, to take the closed system and open it up for full participation in the broader community. And again, the research coming out of California is pretty great on this. When you move school boards to even years, when you do ranked choice voting, when you think about public financing and other pieces of infrastructure, you can recruit a whole different type of candidate and get a whole other type of ideological conversation in our nation's schools. And that's where we have to get to. Now, if people want to say, well, should schools be separate from the city and should the counties and the cities be merged with the schools and this, I work in a lot of rural communities where the school district and the community college are side by side. Should they do more together? Those are all awesome questions. And it comes back to that kind of initial provocation I shared with you all is this is an opportunity for innovation and exploration around how we govern our schools in our democracy. And we should put it all on the table and explore all the potential possibilities. And what we've invited you all into in the Cornerstone Project is an opportunity to start that conversation, not to end it. And that's where I think we need to be going now.
Well, Landon, I have so much gratitude for you for being part of that exploration and the discussion. Thank you for your work. And we'll have a follow-up email with a recording with this information. And I'm going to link your bio for folks again, because you've done so much more than this, which is such important work. So thank you for all the other initiatives, the work that you have done and are doing. I see in the chat too, we've got like the juices flowing, like ways that to introduce RCV to legislators. And so very exciting. I'm really looking forward to the ranked choice voting advocates on this call, expanding, their discussions to talk about these edu races too. I'm excited for people who are in the education space to start talking about the electoral forms, and just keep supporting each other. So thank you so much. I think there's a lot of energy and excitement around this, and we're going to be doing great things.
Thank you, Celia. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate all you're doing.